Annyeong haseyo. Not very good, eh? Firstly, I'd like to extend thanks to KDI and to the government for giving this opportunity to come and talk about Airbnb and the sharing economy. We really do appreciate that. It's a very lovely gesture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Airbnb and the founding story, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more context into what we're doing in Korea and how the market is developing. So our founding story. Who here has used Airbnb? Wow, my team don't count. You have to put your hand up. That's quite a few people. Okay, who's a host? Okay, that's good. Got some hosts. You don't count, Sang. So I'm going to talk a little about founding story, and it's quite interesting. These are our founders. So that's Nate there, Joe in the middle, and Brian sitting on the couch. They started the company back in 2007. And actually, the reason they started the company is that they actually didn't have any money, and they couldn't pay their rent. So you talk about affordable housing, but that was a good example where they couldn't actually afford their own housing. And two of our founders are actually designers, and this was their apartment. A bit messy, but they decided one day to help pay their rent that they would actually take some air mattresses, blow up mattresses, air beds, pull them out of the cupboard, and then essentially rent those beds for the night. Because there was a big design conference coming to town in San Francisco, and they thought, hey, the hotels are full, let's see if we can get some money. So they actually rented out their air beds, and they had their first 3 guests come and stay with them, paying, I think, $80 per night. And those guests stayed with them, and not just slept there, but they also got to know them. They took them out in the evening to restaurants and went to some of the conference with them. So this was a great experience. They realized they could get money for this and that they could actually meet new people. And this is how Airbed and Breakfast first started out. And that, of course, was the first logo. So this here is the conference that happened, and this is how they listed in the first Airbnb website. So an interesting start to the story. And what's interesting is, for me, is that when you talk to the founders, they said everyone told them this is a stupid idea, right? But it's actually one of the stupidest ideas that actually works. And now fast forward from 2007 to today, this now is the headquarters in San Francisco, and the company has now grown along with our community, and we now have 60 million guests that have stayed on Airbnbs, and we have 2 million homes currently. So a lot of growth in that time period. And actually, the Asia-Pacific region, which is the region I work in with the team, is actually the fastest growing region for Airbnb. So that's how we started. And for those of you who don't know much about Airbnb, it's really a platform where you can rent, and for a short period of time, a room or an apartment. And it's really a platform that brings together guests and hosts, the people who rent out their apartments. And it's not just about the apartment, it's about creating really kind of wonderful travel experiences for people, which I can talk about later. What types of property can you rent? Well, everything from a room, an apartment. So you can rent an individual room in someone's house or apartment. You can rent the whole apartment. If you feel like it, you could rent a castle. There's actually about 600 castles on Airbnb at any given time. Tree houses. People are renting tree houses. Yurts, which are big tents in Mongolia. And also vacation rentals. If you're traveling around the world, whether it's Jeju Island or Hawaii or Phuket, wherever you're going, you can also rent villas. So the point here is that there's a wide diversity of these homes that are present on Airbnb. But it's beyond the homes. Airbnb is actually a sharing economy company, but it's a platform and a community where people can connect and have unique travel experiences. It's not just about the accommodation. It's about living like a local. And what's happened is this global community has been created since we started the company, and hosts and guests get to know each other. Whether you're staying with a host in the house or whether the host is actually traveling and keeping contact with you via our platform, you can get a very real sense of what it's like to live like a local, where the best restaurants are, where the nice cafes are, what the attractions are. You can hear straight firsthand from a local. And of course, we've had to develop, as most companies do, back in 2007. Who had a smartphone in 2007? Maybe someone with the first iPhone, maybe. That's fast forward 8 years, and now we have to be omnipresent. So we're accessible through tablets, through mobile, or Apple Watch, wherever our customers are, and our partners and our hosts and guests, we want to be present. So how does it actually work? Well, the guests, if you as a guest, send a request to a host when you find a place that you want to stay at. The hosts decide whether they want to accept. Once they accept, we, Airbnb, collect that payment, and then 24 hours after the stay has started, we then release that payment to the host after the check-in. And when the stay is finished, we have a kind of a blind review system. So the host will review the guest, and the guest will review the host. And that's an important part of our business because this is a platform that's built on trust. And so this review system becomes a very good guide as to where you should stay. You know, if somebody's got 50 great reviews and you can read individual reviews and understand the quality of the accommodation, how the host treated the guest, gives you a lot of confidence. So this review system's key. I think I heard earlier one of the sessions talking about verification. You know, we have a verification system for IDs, which is also very important to let people know who's going to be staying with them. We take the payments through the platform. That's all done directly through our platform and not off the platform. Of course, building trust means that we have customer support. When we first started out, our founders were the customer support. But obviously, things have changed since then, so we have 24/7 customer service. In Korea, for example, we have a CX team, customer service team, trust and safety team. But of course, another part of the trust is insurance. And insurance, I think, came up in discussion with Zipcar. We also have what's called a host guarantee insurance. And that means if a guest accidentally breaks a Ming vase that maybe that the guest has, that the host has, that's insured for up to $1 million. So that's kind of how we build our platform in a nutshell. Here's an example here. You can see the reviews. This is both from the guests and the host. And after they've reviewed each other, they will then go live within 14 days. And then these are publicly available for everybody to see. Of course, just as a side note, guests and hosts can also send notes to us separately if they want to make a private comment. Okay, so that's how things work. What are the benefits for sharing, for home sharing in Korea? Well, one of the things we're very committed to as a company is to be as transparent as we can with the various cities and countries that we work with. So today we'll be releasing some data that's more specific about Korea and what's happening on our platform and community in Korea. We believe that Airbnb and the sharing economy in general is a very positive thing, obviously, we would say that. But we're going to give you some examples and reasons why to support this. I mean, the first element is tourism. There's a very strong impact, and I think the professor will be talking a little bit about some of that later on, but there is a very strong impact on tourism that we've seen from home sharing in general, not just Airbnb. That's to the wider tourism case, but also very much local economy. I'm going to give you some numbers which show the financial impact at the very local micro neighborhood areas that guests stay in. And then, of course, from the host and guest perspective, what's in it for them? Well, we've seen tremendous growth. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that Asia-Pacific is Airbnb's fastest growing region. If you look on the right-hand side of the slide there first, these are guests that are coming into Korea. Well over 300,000 now, and if you go back just 9 months ago, that's basically doubled from 9 months ago. So in this latest period, November to October, 333,000 guests that are coming in and are staying on Airbnbs in Korea. One of the important points to highlight around hosting is that it's really about people sharing their home on an occasional basis. This is not about people sharing their home on a constant basis. And so the typical host rents in Korea, the typical host rents their apartment for about 53 days. So about four or 5 days a month is what the typical host would do. And they generate income, and the host is generating around $3,000 in Korea. So there's some numbers that we haven't actually put out so far, but that gives you a sense of what's happening for the tourism. So lots of guests now coming in, and that growing very fast. And hosts who are renting out their apartments, they're usually their primary residence, are earning about $3,000. So it's not a job. It's not a full-time endeavor. For the most part, it is supplemental income that our hosts are generating. I talked a little bit about the economic impact, and there's more notes, I think, coming from Professor Byers, but two numbers to highlight in terms of promoting the local economy. What we find is that tourists who are using Airbnb versus traditional methods, say a hotel, are spending on average 27% more. That's really because they're staying longer. Yeah, they're spending more. And perhaps if you dig down a bit deeper, the guests spend more in neighborhoods, 32% more. And that's daytime spend in neighborhoods. And when you think about it, it makes sense. I'm staying at an Airbnb this week while I'm in Korea. I'm staying about 3 minutes walk from the office. And I'm staying in an apartment. I've got a kitchen. And I was with one of my colleagues, and we went out and ate at a local restaurant. There's a local coffee shop I could go to. So I'm spending money in an area which wouldn't normally necessarily get money. And that's one of the big economic benefits, I think, that the sharing economy can bring, particularly the model that Airbnb has. Because if you were I haven't got the slide here, but if you were to look at a scattergram, and I think the professor has some scattergrams, you can see that Airbnbs are dotted all around the cities. They're not just concentrated where the hotels are. And so what that means is when visitors are coming, they're spending money in places that would not normally get money. And we can see a strong economic impact from that. So hosts use the income they generate to help make ends meet. This $3,000 as a typical host, obviously some less, some more, but that's a good number that really for the majority of cases. And this number is quite significant in terms of the impact it can make to everyday people. A lot of our hosts are just everyday people, often in many countries, middle to lower income. And this can be a significant part of them paying their bills, paying their mortgages. And if you think about in Korea, as an aging population, a lot of retirees, this extra supplemental income can be very important for their household budgets. In terms of guests, the value really becomes from authentic experiences. I'll show you some data in a minute, which shows that a lot of guests who come here for the first time on Airbnb are more likely to come back because of Airbnb. They can spend longer, not just more money, but spend longer. They can see more. They can live like a local. And these authentic experiences are very, very important for people. And also with the rise of the millennial guests, you can see that these experiences are going to become ever more important. And then I think there's another area of the wider community is the startup community and small businesses I talked about, the cafes, but also startups. We're seeing that Airbnb almost brings an ecosystem that other companies are building around. There's a couple of examples that I can think of. One is companies are starting to build solutions for hosts, so electronic locks. There's a company in Singapore that we were working with, partnering with in a couple of the markets that had a solution that turned off the air conditioning. So that if guests accidentally left on the air conditioning, they could register through their phone and turn it off automatically. And in very hot countries, this can amount to a high bill. People don't always remember to turn it off. So there's all sorts of these solutions. There was another company in Hong Kong that was providing a service that removed all your clothing. So if you go on holiday and you decide to rent on Airbnb, they would come, take your clothing, catalog it, photograph it, take it away from you automatically, free up your apartment for guests, and then when you come back, you could have it delivered back again. So there's this whole ecosystem that is developing around some of, not just Airbnb, but many of these sharing economy models, which I think is very good for this creative economy, particularly in Korea that we're trying to develop. A good example here, this is Joan and Richard. Joan and Richard are Korean hosts. They were, one of them was, they're both teachers, and Richard recently retired. They had grown-up children. Their children fled the nest, and their children went to university in the US, so they were kind of left with some spare space in their house. And Richard, who was a very active teacher, suddenly was, he'd retired. So this was a great thing. It killed two birds with one stone. They were able to host on Airbnb and make some extra supplemental income, which help offset some of the income he'd lost as a teacher. And also, he stayed connected. He had guests from all over the world come and talk to him, and he could meet faces from all around the world and travel without even traveling in some senses. So that's a typical story. And as you meet different hosts are really our partners, you hear some great reasons for them hosting. And one of them that comes up a lot is that a lot of people want to share their culture with other people. So the money is obviously important and helps, but another primary reason is I want to share what my culture is like with foreign visitors, and this is a big push. So who's using Airbnb when they're traveling into Korea? I'll give you a little bit of data. This is from our own numbers. The average age of Airbnb guests in Korea is 30. Now that average is pretty consistent across the world. Millennials, a lot of younger people adopt these models first. We're seeing that number go up. And what we do see also, the hosts, the people who rent out their properties and apartments and rooms, they're actually older. So you've got this nice movement where you have sort of the older generation sort of talking to the younger generation and meeting in homes and giving each other's experiences. Of course, that's an average, and the millennials is one key element. At the moment, I think this will change over time. Many of our guests, 75% of them, have at least a college degree. And 44% are their first trips to Korea for international guests. So Airbnb is almost a reason for them to come and try and live in a different city, for at least for a short period. And that's what you hear a lot. Last night I was coming home in the cab with a colleague, and he said, "Oh, where's your place? Where are you living? Not where are you staying?" Because when I get back to the apartment, I feel I've got a kitchen, I've put the TV, the heating on, and it's like my home. I live there. For that period I'm there, I live there. So there's a much greater connection there that makes a big difference. There's an emotional attachment. And 20% would spend less time on their trip without Airbnb. And this may have something to do with the value, the economic value, and the authenticity of the experience. And perhaps most interesting to me is 90% want amenities or services beyond traditional hotels. If you're traveling, I don't know, those who've got kids, a kitchen's pretty important. If you want access to things in the neighborhood, you want easy parking, you want your privacy, Airbnb provides all that. And these are the sort of services people are looking for. So, in terms of guests, Airbnb's goal is really to bring in very respectful guests into Korea to experience Korean hospitality, authentic Korean hospitality. And really, if I captured it, it would be to live like a local. Even if you're there for 3 or 4 days, living like a local and going back and telling people brings a lot of visitors back. And I won't go into all of these, but here's some quotes from some of our guests and hosts, which talk about the discussions and considerate nature of the hosts. Excitement of having people from all around the world come and stay with you. So, we talked about this a little bit. A vast majority of people want to experience Korean hospitality, or if they're going to Italy, Italian hospitality. They want that local experience. 90% say they want to live like a local, and 78% want to return to Korea as a result. So I think there's this nice network, this cycle that happens where people have great experiences. They want to go home and tell people about it. They want to go on social media. They want to talk about it, show the pictures and share it. And it's all about that authentic experience that you can't have elsewhere. So, in the interest of time, I will push on. So let's go into a little bit how we work with the cities and the countries. One of the challenges, of course, in this world, and perhaps the reason for the forum, is that many of the laws that were constructed around actually renting in most countries are 30, 40, 50 years old. So they're kind of outdated, as you know. And we've been working with many of the cities around the world to try and come up with fair regulations. And regulations which center around occasional home sharing of people's primary residence, the place where they live. In fact, it's not on this deck, but 82% of Airbnb globally of our hosts rent out their primary residence, the place where they live. So here's I guess, the issue and the challenge is that there's either no regulation when you're visiting a friend, or there's quite intense regulations for most countries where you have to be fully registered and licensed. Our view is that actually what we're talking about, and I showed the figures earlier, is that what about those people who want to occasionally rent their primary residence, and it's 40 or 50 or 60 days a year, so it's an occasional thing, they want to supplement their income for all the good reasons. The regulation, we're not saying there should be no regulation, but we're saying that the regulations that exist for commercial scale operations don't really make sense. So what's the middle ground? And we've greatly encouraged that the government and KDI is very open-minded to have this forum to at least hear the other side about how the sharing economy can really benefit Korea, and getting some of the data from us, which we believe supports a strong argument to make a change and to create some regulations which allow for primary houses to be occasionally shared by Koreans, for all the good reasons I mentioned. And this is not necessarily a new discussion for us at Airbnb. We've been talking about this a lot all across the world, because the situation is the same with the regulations. And for the most part, you'll see here, and I'm not going to go into detail in every country, but there's been some very positive developments where we've had these discussions, mostly in Europe, United States, Australia. Very recently, London, after 40 years of a very old law, repealed that law and brought in some new legislation, new regulation around home sharing. This is happening in Paris, it's happening in Portugal, it's happening across the board in Europe. And I think the great opportunity here in Korea is that we are now having these discussions. Now that Airbnb is obviously growing so fast in Asia Pacific, the fastest growing region, these discussions are now surfacing with governments all around this region. And we think there's a great opportunity in Korea for them to lead and to be first and create some regulations that are fair for Korea, but also encourage this form of home sharing, this occasional home sharing, and to help develop the economy and also tourism. So it's happened here. I'd love to come back in a year's time and put up a list here with Korea right at the top as a country that has created regulation which makes sense for all the different parties. Tourist taxes often comes up. Airbnb wants to be a contributor to the economies that we work with, to the countries and markets and cities that we work with. So many discussions now, we actually collect, in many markets, we collect tourist tax from the guests. We save that up, and then we write a check and remit that back to the council or the government or the various different bodies, depending on what they are. And it is quite a complex area. I've got a list of pages and pages of all the different types of tourist taxes that happen. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis. It's a complex area, but we're working towards that. In terms of large-scale events, there's another area where we're greatly encouraged the cooperation that we're having. In Brazil, the next Olympics in 2006, next year, well, it's not long. It's come around again very quickly. We are the official partner of the Olympics for accommodation. For a 4-week event, or 3 or 4 week event, it doesn't really make sense to build 20 hotels, right, to accommodate everybody. So we now can, for a large event, can use Airbnb in partnership with the government to accommodate large groups of people that come in for these big, iconic events in each country. And after Rio, the next 3 Olympics are all going to be in Asia, right? The winter, summer, winter. Obviously in 2 years' time in Korea for the Winter Olympics, and then Tokyo 2020. So these are areas of large-scale events, World Cups, Olympics, other big events. When the Pope came in the US, a lot of people came to see the Pope. We had lots of Airbnbs, people opening up their homes and sharing them to all people around the world. These are the types of events where we can help. In another area I think is very important is disaster relief. We have this great community of people, and it's really not about Airbnb, it's about the community. We're a platform, we're a facilitator. And this community of hosts can open up their homes of time of need. And a great example was I actually flew in from Paris. I was in Paris last week, unfortunately. And at the tragic events that happened in Paris, a lot of people, I actually got locked in a restaurant till 3 a.m. Along with some colleagues. And a lot of people were displaced. They couldn't get back to their home. There was a lot of tourists there who were stuck. And we opened up the platform, and our hosts were great. What happened was We waived our fee. There was over 200 apartments were put Airbnb for zero cost, so everyone was just doing it for free, opening up their homes, using our platform so that people could stay until the uncertainty had disappeared. And this is just a very recent example, a painful example, but it shows the humanity on the platform and the community that can happen at times of need. And this has happened many times before in disaster relief. One last thing, I think we announced last week that our community compact, or charter, if you like, and there's 3 kind of pillars on this that are very important. We want to work with every city, and each city is very different, whether it's through taxes, tourist taxes, or just the complexities of cities. And we want to make sure that our community, the Airbnb community, pays its fair share of the hotel and tourist taxes. And we're doing that on a case-by-case basis. That's one commitment we have. The second thing is to be as open and transparent as possible. So I just gave you some data there on what's happening on our platform in Korea, how much hosts are earning. It's different in Australia, for example. The average host there earns about $7,000 a year. So it's all different in each market. And so what we're doing is providing that data for our community in many of the key cities. And we also want to promote responsible home sharing. And we think responsible is primary residence, and that's how we hope the regulation, the opportunity of the regulation is to talk about the primary residence that people live in and occasional sharing. And we feel that this is a new sector which is going very quickly, and that we as a company can play a part in Korea's bright future, and we want to be a real partner with the government. So I'll just finally say thanks for the time and appreciate the invitation. I'd like to highlight the fact that Korea is well ahead of everyone else. In many respects, it's one of our fastest growing regions, countries in the world. Asia Pacific is fastest growing, and Korea is one of the top 3 markets there for Airbnb. We'd love Korea to be one of the top markets for forward thinking on regulation. Thank you very much.